Bart Schleyer was a famous outdoorsman, woodsman, hunter, as well as a playboy. He was described as a survival expert. In September 2004, Bart went off for a trip in the Canadian wilderness. His last contact was when a chartered float plane left him at a larger of the Reed Lakes in Canada's Yukon Territory on September 14th. Reed Lakes is on the southern slope of the Selwyn Mountains, about 175 miles north of the town of Whitehorse, and the nearest settlement is Stewart Crossing, about 15 miles from the lakes, on the road from Whitehorse to Dawson. He was well equipped for the trip with 3 plastic action Packard crates, with enough food for at least 2 weeks, clothing and camp gear, such as a tent and an inflatable boat. When the plane that dropped Bart off returned 2 weeks later to collect him and take him back to civilization, the experienced woodsman was gone. A search by the RCMP that started on September 30th, 2004 turned up nothing. Dib Williams, a friend of Schleyer's, was sure that he was there and conducted a more thorough search when the RCMP left the scene. He found some remains on October 3rd, 2004. It looked like a bear had taken him out, but for this man, an expert in bear behavior and a highly experienced hunter, some remained skeptical of this explanation. Almost everyone who knew Schleyer believed he was simply too good a woodsman, too alert while in the forest to have a bear catch him by surprise. Was it really a rogue bear attack, or did something else happen out there in the Yukon? Bart Schleyer was a trained scientist who worked for the Grizzly Bear Recovery Project in Yellowstone National Park in the 1980s, before moving north to Alaska. He was one of the world's foremost experts at capturing radio collaring and tracking tigers, and spent months in Russia working to help save endangered Siberian tigers. He had a Russian girlfriend, Tanya Perova, and they had a son, Artem. Bart was born to Dr. Otis Schleyer and his wife, Lula Rose, in Cheyenne, Wyoming in 1955. Dr. Schleyer, a physician who practiced in Cheyenne, loved to hunt. He took Bart along from an early age. Bart's sister, Claudia Downey, tells of Bart's childhood obsession with animals. He didn't just like them, he wanted to know everything about them, study where they lived and how they lived. My dad took Bart with him on safari to Mozambique when he was 10 years old. He had a chance to witness an incredible variety of animals that he could otherwise only read about. When he finally got the chance to hunt, he was drawn even closer. Hunting seemed to give purpose to his studies. Bart would draw pictures of animals and continue to develop an artist into childhood. Bart focused his education on wildlife biology and transferred to Montana State University, where he received his master's degree in 1979. Professor Don Collins taught an undergraduate class called Man and the Environment for more than 20 years. Dr. Collins says, quote, "Out of the 42,000 students who took that class, Bart was a standout. He was knowledgeable in everything wild, from animals and birds to flowers, trees, and shrubs. Bart spent a great deal of time alone in the mountains while working on his thesis, The Activity Patterns of Grizzly Bears in Yellowstone. It was as if he prepared his entire life to do this. He was superbly suited for the demands of the job. To conduct these studies, Bart used live capture techniques and then placed telemetry radio collars on the bears to monitor their activities." End quote. After college, Bart stayed in Montana, where he worked for Fish and Game and the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team. He made vital contributions to a team challenged with determining the reaction grizzly bears demonstrate after encroachment by humans. It was also important to know the habitat requirements and birth and mortality rates of the bears, including those living in the remote Bob Marshall Wilderness. His experiences in backpacking and self-reliance, fostered through years of bow hunting, made the research work much easier for him. He stayed out in the mountains for months at a time. Packing meat for bait and heavy cable for foot snares became routine. He didn't just endure physical hardship, he enjoyed it. Schleyer organized his life so that he could spend as much time as possible in the field, and he was about as tough as they get when he was in the outdoors. He loved using a traditional bow and the arrows he made himself. When the plane that dropped Bart off returned 2 weeks later to collect him and take him back to civilization, the experienced woodsman was gone. The pilot thought this was strange, as he was no city slicker. He knew how to handle himself in even the most remote wilderness and could be described as a survival expert. Bart was reported missing on September 30th, 2004, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, promptly launched a comprehensive search and found nothing. According to the RCMP, he had lunch or supper in camp. Since the remains of the meal were found, Bart had evidently used his boat and paddled it down the lake from camp, and it was found around half a mile from the camp. The Mounties thought there was a possibility Schleyer might have hiked out to the highway, and with the deteriorating weather, they called it a day. Dib Williams, a friend of Schleyer's in Whitehorse, was dissatisfied with the RCMP's efforts and got pilot friend Wayne Curry to fly them to the camp after they had departed. They found Bart's tent had been knocked down, either by wind or animals, but all the equipment was there. They searched the area around the tent and found his backpack, bear spray, a knife, and a VHF radio. Williams and Curry got increasingly concerned, as they didn't buy the story that Schleyer had hiked out when he left such key equipment behind. On the second day of their search, they found his bow near the inflatable boat. About 60 yards back in the woods from the boat, the bow and arrows in a handmade buckskin quiver were leaned up against a tree next to a dry bag full of gear on which he probably had been sitting, and this was located on flat ground next to a thicket of black spruce and willows. Curtis, an experienced moose hunter, said it looked like the sort of place an archer might set up if trying to call a moose into range. A little further on, they found a camouflage face mask with blood and hair on it, and at this point, they called the RCMP back to the area. The official search resumes, and more remains are located. On October 3rd, the Mounties, Yukon conservation officers, and civilian volunteers flew back to the area to begin more detailed grid search. At first, they found little but bear and wolf tracks, but then a baseball cap was spotted by the searchers, and then camouflage pants, a camera, part of a skull, and just a few small bones. All these items were 60 meters or so from the bow and the spruce tree. The teeth in the skull allowed the subsequent identification of the remains as being Bart Schleyer. There wasn't much more of his body found. Since there was quite a bit of grizzly scat in the area, it fueled speculation that Schleyer had been unexpectedly killed and eaten by a bear, as happened with the famous Timothy Treadwell, whose death was captured in a documentary by Werner Herzog in 2006 called Grizzly Man, based on video footage that Treadwell and his girlfriend had been filming. Amongst some of the bear scat samples, there were some bone fragments, but no fabric. In Treadwell's case, not only were human remains found in the bear's stomach contents that had killed him and his girlfriend, but also large amounts of their clothing. Most of Schleier's clothing were never found, but searchers and friends were skeptical it was a bear attack that had taken Bart out. First, there was no sign of death, no struggle. No vegetation or ground had been disturbed. The remains were found in a little patch of sparse spruce lying on the moss, as if a bear had killed him. This would be unusual, as they usually bury their kills in a cache. The remains of Treadwell and his girlfriend were found in such a cache after they were killed, but there was no cache anywhere in the area that searchers could locate. The Vancouver pathologist who examined Schleyer's remains found no tooth punctures in his skull, nor indications of scratch marks from teeth. When bears attack people, they almost always go for the head. Even if he started off playing dead, a recommended tactic for surviving a grizzly bear attack, friends said he would have known that if the animal continued to attack, the only chance for survival would be to fight back, and generally speaking, a bear attack is prolonged and violent. A friend said, quote, "I think the least likely scenario is some sort of surprise encounter, but it's hard for me to imagine having a bear sneak up and get him," end quote. Almost everyone who knew Schleyer believed he was simply too good a woodsman, too alert while in the forest, to have a bear catch him by surprise. Bart's hat, for example, was completely undamaged. If a bear had got him, it's even harder to imagine the animal killing him without leaving signs of a struggle on the site. covered with soft, easily disturbed moss. An attack goes on for a long time. The audio tape of Treadwell's death goes on for more than many minutes, recording the sounds of him and his partner being eaten alive. The balaclava contained little blood and hair, and his pants even less. If a bear attacks a man, it won't remove his pants without them being shredded and soaked in blood. Normally, bears grab the end, especially when attacking from behind, causing profuse bleeding. So why wasn't the balaclava blood-soaked? Others disagree and say that even for an experienced woodsman, a predatory bear could sneak up and deliver a fatal attack. The plastic container that held his food there had not been disturbed, and bear experts said that if a grizzly had killed Schleyer, it is likely the same bear would have gone to the camp, given the proximity, and even eaten through the canned food. Everything points to the evidence being scavenging related, not caused by a violent direct attack. The circumstances of Bart's death are very strange, even if experts and searchers disagree with the cause. Brigitte Parker, a spokeswoman for the Mounties in Whitehorse, said the case remains open, but the organization leans toward the idea that Schleyer was attacked and killed by a bear. Quote, everything at the scene suggested a bear attack and did not suggest foul play, end quote. Apart from a bear attack, potential explanations include a wolf attack, but these are even rarer than bear attacks, and no physical evidence on the ground, and the bag he was sitting on was untouched with no blood. Natural death from a heart attack or brain aneurysm, with the body later taken apart by scavenging animals. At 49 years of age and at peak physical fitness, it seems unlikely, but possible. Even with all the theories and evidence, most friends and family still believe that something else happened in those woods that somehow does not make sense, possibly something outside the realm of any conventional thinking. The case still remains open.